The woman on stage held up a letter and said, "My son wanted to send this to you." Simon Cowell had to stop the show. America's Got Talent. The Dolby Theater in Los Angeles. Another Tuesday night taping. Another packed audience. Cameras rolling. The familiar rhythm of the show, hopeful performers, emotional backstories, Simon's sharp critiques cutting through dreams with surgical precision. This was supposed to be audition number 47 of the evening. A woman had signed up. No singing. No dancing. No magic tricks. Just a request to speak directly to Simon Cowell about her son. The producers had almost cut her from the lineup. "This isn't a talk show," one had argued. But something in her intake interview, the quiet dignity, the aged envelope she carried, the way she said, "My son wanted him to know," had convinced them to give her 3 minutes. 3 minutes that would change everything. Sarah Mitchell walked onto the stage. 58 years old. Gray hair pulled back simply. Modest dark blouse and slacks. No theatrical entrance. No dramatic music. Just a mother carrying an envelope that had been sitting in a drawer for 6 years. She stood center stage under the lights. 300 audience members watched. 4 judges sat at their desk. Simon Cowell, arms crossed in his usual position, waited with that familiar expression of polite skepticism. Host Terry Crews approached with his microphone. "Welcome to America's Got Talent. What's your name?" "Sarah Mitchell." "From Ohio." "And Sarah, what will you be doing for us today?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. When she looked back up, her eyes were already filling with tears. "I'm not here to perform," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. "I'm here because my son, David, wrote a letter 6 years ago. He wrote it to Simon Cowell. But he never sent it. And I think Simon needs to hear what it says." Cameras were live when the mother on stage held up a letter said, "My son wanted to send this to you." And Simon Cowell had to stop the show. Simon's posture changed immediately. The crossed arms dropped. He leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from skeptical to concerned. "Your son wrote to me?" Simon asked, his voice quieter than usual. "Yes. 6 years ago. He was 17. He watched your shows constantly, American Idol, The X Factor, Britain's Got Talent. He said you changed how he saw the world. Where is your son now?" Sarah's face crumpled for just a moment before she composed herself. "David died 4 years ago. He was 19. Brain cancer." The audience gasped. Howie Mandel's hand went to his mouth. Heidi Klum reached over to touch Simon's arm. Sofia Vergara was already crying. Simon stood up. Not the casual standing he sometimes did during performances. This was different. Urgent. He stepped out from behind the judge's desk and walked toward the stage, something he rarely did during auditions. "I'm so sorry," Simon said, his voice carrying genuine pain. "I'm so deeply sorry." "Thank you," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "But that's not why I'm here. David wanted you to know something. And I've carried this letter for 2 years since I found it. I almost threw it away a dozen times. But every time I tried I felt like he was telling me it mattered. That you needed to see it." Simon was standing at the base of the stage now, looking up at her. "May I read it?" Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. "Actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to read it to you." In his voice. The way he would have. Simon nodded. The theater was completely silent. Even the cameramen seemed to be holding their breath. Sarah unfolded the letter. The paper was worn, yellowed slightly at the edges, covered in a teenager's handwriting. She took a deep breath and began. Simon stopped the show. No one knew what was happening. "Dear Mr. Cowell," Sarah read, her voice shaking but determined. "My name is David Mitchell. I'm 17 years old. I'm writing this letter from my hospital room at Cleveland Clinic. I've been here for 3 months. Brain cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say I probably have 6 months, maybe a year if the treatment works. Sarah paused, composing herself. The audience was crying. Simon's jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on her. I'm not writing to ask you for anything. Sarah continued, reading David's words. I'm not asking you to visit me or call me or make some wish come true. I know you get thousands of letters like that. I'm writing because I need to tell you something that I think you don't know. Something I think nobody tells you. She looked up from the letter briefly, meeting Simon's eyes, then continued. I've watched you judge people my whole life. I've watched you tell singers they're terrible. I've watched you send dancers home. I've watched you crush dreams on live television. And everyone always says you're mean. They say you're cruel. They say you don't have a heart. Sarah's voice broke slightly. But they're wrong. And I need you to know that they're wrong. Simon's eyes were glistening now. He hadn't moved. Hadn't spoken. Just stood there taking in every word. 3 years ago, I watched you give a golden buzzer to a kid who lost his dad. Sarah read. You didn't just say he was good. You got up, you walked onto that stage, and you told him that his father would be proud. And then you cried. You actually cried on television. I watched that moment in my bedroom, and I cried too. Because my own dad had just died. Heart attack. Unexpected. And I was angry at the world. But watching you be honest about emotion, about loss, about how hard it is to keep going when someone you love is gone, it helped me. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this performance is still ahead. Sarah wiped her eyes and continued reading her son's words. See, Mr. Cowell, what you do isn't cruel. It's honest. And honesty is the kindest thing you can give someone who's dying. Because when you're dying, everyone lies to you. They tell you you're going to be fine. They tell you the treatment is working. They tell you everything is going to be okay even when you can see in their eyes that it's not. But you don't lie. You tell singers when they're not good enough. You tell acts when they need to work harder. You tell people the truth even when it hurts. And somehow, that truth is more comforting than all the lies everyone else tells. Simon's hand had gone to his mouth. His shoulders were shaking slightly. I've spent 3 months in this hospital. Sarah read, her own tears falling onto the paper now. And everyone, doctors, nurses, my mom, my friends, they all tell me I'm brave. They tell me I'm a fighter. They tell me I'm going to beat this. But you know what? I'm not going to beat this. The cancer is winning. And I'm scared. I'm 17 years old and I'm dying and I'm terrified. But watching your shows helps. Because you don't pretend. You don't give false hope. You tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And in a weird way, that makes me feel less alone. Sarah looked up from the letter again. There's more, she said to Simon. Do you want me to continue? Simon couldn't speak. He just nodded. So I'm writing this letter to say thank you. Sarah read. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for crying on television when that kid talked about his dad. Thank you for showing that it's okay to feel things, even when you're supposed to be tough. I probably won't send this letter. I'll probably chicken out. But I needed to write it anyway. Because if I die tomorrow, I want you to know that you made a difference. Not because you discovered some superstar. Not because you created some hit show. But because you were real. And real is what people like me need more than anything. So thank you, Mr. Cowell. Thank you for being the mean judge who's actually the kindest person on television. I hope someday you know how many people you've helped just by being yourself. Sarah folded the letter carefully. It's signed David Mitchell. Age 17. Cleveland, Ohio. The theater was silent except for the sound of 300 people crying. Howie had his face in his hands. Heidi was openly sobbing. Sophia had left the judge's desk and was standing behind Simon, her hand on his shoulder. Simon Cowell, known for crushing dreams, for devastating critiques, for being the harshest voice in entertainment, was crying. Tears streaming down his face, not even trying to hide them. Backstage, producers were begging him to continue, but he didn't. Simon walked up the stairs onto the stage. He approached Sarah, and without a word, he pulled her into an embrace. She collapsed against him, sobbing, this woman who had been strong for so long finally able to break down. "I'm so sorry," Simon whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry you lost him. He loved you," Sarah said into his shoulder. "He watched every show. Even at the end, when he could barely stay awake, he'd watch your episodes. You gave him something to look forward to." They stood there for a long moment, the famous judge and the grieving mother, while the audience watched something far more important than any performance. Finally, Simon pulled back, his hands on Sarah's shoulders. "May I keep the letter?" "That's why I brought it," Sarah said. "It was meant for you." Simon took the letter from her with trembling hands. He looked down at David's handwriting, at this teenager's words written from a hospital bed 4 years ago. "I need to tell you something," Simon said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "And I need everyone here and everyone watching to hear this." He turned to face the audience, still holding the letter. "I've been doing this for 25 years, Simon said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've judged thousands of acts. I've been called every name you can imagine. Mean, cruel, heartless. And I've always told myself it doesn't matter what people think of me as long as I'm honest. But the truth is, it does hurt. It hurts to be seen as the villain. It hurts to know that people think I enjoy crushing dreams. Because I don't. I never have." He looked back at Sarah. "Your son understood something that most people don't. He understood that honesty, real, uncomfortable honesty, is an act of love. It's harder to tell someone the truth than to tell them a comfortable lie. And David saw that. At 17 years old, dying in a hospital bed, he saw what I was really trying to do." Simon's voice broke completely. "I wish I'd gotten this letter when he sent it. I wish I could have written back. I wish I could have told him that he was braver than any performer I've ever judged. Because facing death with that kind of clarity, that kind of grace, that's true courage." He held up the letter. "This letter is going in my office. In a frame. Where I can see it every single day. Because when I doubt myself, when I wonder if what I'm doing matters, I'm going to read David's words. And I'm going to remember that somewhere, a 17-year-old kid understood. But what happened next? No one in the theater, or watching at home, could ever forget." Simon walked back to the judge's desk. But instead of sitting down, he placed his hand on the golden buzzer. Terry Crews stepped forward, confused. "Simon, she didn't perform." "I don't care," Simon interrupted. "This woman came here to honor her son. She came here to share his words. And those words deserve every bit of recognition we can give them." His hand slammed down on the button. Golden confetti exploded across the stage. The audience leaped to their feet, not in excitement but in reverence, standing to honor a mother's courage and a son's wisdom. The other judges stood too, applauding, crying, bearing witness to something that transcended entertainment. Sarah stood in the falling confetti, overwhelmed, as Simon came back onto the stage. He took her hand and raised it high. "Ladies and gentlemen," Simon said, his voice carrying through the theater, "Sarah Mitchell. And her son David, who changed my life with a letter I never received until today." The applause continued for nearly 5 minutes. The producers eventually had to call a break because everyone, crew, judges, audience, needed time to compose themselves. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten. After the show, Simon had David's letter professionally preserved and framed. It hangs in his office at Psycho Entertainment in London. Above it, a small plaque reads, "David Mitchell. Age 17, the truth teller." Simon established a foundation in David's name that funds music therapy programs in children's cancer wards. Every golden buzzer he's given since that night, he dedicates silently to the boy who wrote him a letter from a hospital bed. Sarah visits Simon once a year. They don't talk much. They don't need to. She sits in his office, looks at her son's framed letter, and knows David's words are still changing lives. The letter taught Simon something he'd spent 25 years learning. Being honest isn't cruel. Being honest is the greatest act of love. And somewhere, a 17-year-old boy who never sent his letter finally got his message delivered.